I know this must feel like delaying the inevitable, trying to push off talking about the seismic event that is Final Fantasy VII in what will likely end up as some 5-hour mega video extravaganza. To stay with the SNES just a little bit longer before the seal on 3D is broken, and we never go back. But really, it's somewhat the opposite. I'm super jazzed to talk about Final Fantasy VII, and I can't wait to do that video. Talking about Radical Dreamers is the last piece of cleanup I want to do before we get there. We could have stayed on the SNES much longer than we did. There were numerous games that Square put out that could be important to take a look at in regards to their Final Fantasy relation or just the company as a whole. But Chrono Trigger was the obvious one. And if we are going to look at Chrono Trigger, we should probably take a look at Chrono Cross one day. And if we're going to take a look at Chrono Cross one day, then we might as well take a pit stop to look at Radical Dreamers. This also maybe gives away the plot a little bit. This diversion, much more so than our look at Chrono Trigger, is a heads up that this series is about to go in some interesting directions. That kinda on the end of the series name is about to be invoked a lot more than it has in the past. When we reach the PlayStation 1, the gloves come off. Square goes from gigantic to nearly unfathomable as their output with their main Final Fantasy series and the offspring it creates will be cataloged as fully as I can muster. So this is our last foray before we enter Square's worldwide takeover. Our last chance to live life in the second dimension. Our final wave goodbye to what could be considered Square's Silver Age, as we take a look at a funky little game made for an even funkier piece of hardware. Before we can even talk about Radical Dreamers, we need to talk about the Satellaview. Released in 1995, this Japan-exclusive attachment for the Super Famicom allowed the console owners to access new media via broadband satellite connections. If you ever wondered where the BS in front of so many Satellaview games comes from, it's broadband satellite. This peripheral came about due to Nintendo attempting to rescue radio satellite subsidiary Saint Giga, a once popular company that was struggling through the post-bubble Japanese recession. With their powers combined, Nintendo had R&D2 create the peripheral, and Saint Giga added a new programming block to their radio for the Super Famicom Hour. Basically, a promotional time for Nintendo to detail news and gameplay tips. The Satellaview is an interesting little curio of its time, being a bit of a failure, much like its bedfellow, the Virtual Boy, and existing in that strange lull before the 5th generation of consoles declared 3D was really the future path. But while it underperformed, it wasn't a complete bomb like Nintendo's Red and Black disappointment. Satellaview owners could access popular magazines, audio broadcasts, and most importantly of all, video games. And not just any video games, but games made by people putting in a real effort. Nintendo had their own first-party releases, but Taito, Capcom, Jaleco, Chunsoft, Pack & Video, and of course, Square all put out releases for the Satellaview. Which brings us to said release. Masato Kato, the writer who made a name for himself on Chrono Trigger, was given director and writing duties for this game. Kato felt that Chrono Trigger had ended with, quote, unfinished business, and was using Radical Dreamers to continue on. He was also using it to, post through it seems. Kato was increasingly disgruntled after Chrono Trigger's development. Honestly, if you read through his November 1999 interview after Chrono Cross, it seems like he's been kinda going through it for a while. This helped give Radical Dreamers a darker tone, being somewhat offset by the additional writers on board having more comedic bonus scenarios added to the game. Sadly, if Kato thought Chrono Trigger might have some loose ends, Radical Dreamers wasn't about to fare any better. Initially, Square wanted this game pushed out in 2 months, and Kato's team hustled to make it happen in 3. Kato also describes Radical Dreamers as rushed and unfinished, going so far to say that when he looked back at the script a couple years later, he was embarrassed. He rejected Radical Dreamers being added to the PlayStation 1 port of Chrono Trigger for these reasons. This has led to Radical Dreamers being a bit of a lost game to North Americans for quite some time, between both its hardware and regional exclusivity. The only way to play it was through a 2003 fan translation by ROM hacking group Demiforce, and even that would take another 2 years until it was fully finished with all the kinks worked out. It wasn't until 2022 with the Chrono Cross Radical Dreamers Edition release that Radical Dreamers was officially made available for English-speaking fans. Given the genre we are working with here, Radical Dreamers is a game with background graphics where text is laid over it. The backgrounds are strange in a good way. Like, very little of this game looks like a SNES game, insofar that there are very few pixel assets. Predominantly, the backgrounds look more like digitized art assets that were made to fit the game. This extends to enemies too. Since they don't need to move, you get these heavily detailed baddies that feel ever so out of place in a Chrono game because they aren't moving, animating pixel bad guys. There's still emotion going on, like taking the stairs has this rudimentary animation to it. But with so much of this game in this style, it kind of comes off as a surprise when the death trap ceiling shows up and it's a very SNES sprite scaling asset. But really, more important than the actual art style is the tone. Radical Dreamers is dark. It is lightless. It feels dank and mysterious and oftentimes scary. I think they fucking nailed the feeling of slinking around a dangerous castle hoping you don't get caught. There is a palpable tension to your choices. You do not want to encounter traps or enemies on this journey. So much of the game is silent, barring some ambient noises. In fact, one of the few energetic songs that shows up in this game is the first showing of what would go on to be Chrono Cross's battle theme. During battles or intense events, this song will appear, and it's not the only one that would make a return in Chrono Cross. While small, given the size of the work, the soundtrack was composed by Kato's buddy, Yasunori Masuda, and a little less than half of what is on display moves forward into Cross. While Gale, the battle theme, is likely the most notable song here, I really want to give a moment to The Girl Who Stole the Stars. This might be one of the best Masuda tracks I've heard. It's poignant and emotional in a way that is both gentle with its touch, but firm in its conviction. I went out of my way to hear how this sounds in Chrono Cross, and buddy, it nearly brought me to tears. And I guess one last thing to mention, we'll talk about this more at the end, but Radical Dreamers is not exactly a canon entry in the Chrono series. Chrono Cross, to my understanding, redoes what Radical Dreamers is setting out to do. As such, you probably have an idea of who Kid, Surge, and Guile are in your heads. That's not exactly who Kid, Surge, and especially Magil / Gil, depending on your translation, are, and the small snippets you see of them will have them looking pretty different to their more famous counterparts. I'll mention it here that I am playing the fan translation, and some things, like just how Australian or British Kid's accent comes off as, are different between the two. Radical Dreamers is primarily a text adventure, an ADV game if you are a real nerd. I think calling it a visual novel is a misnomer because there isn't anything particularly novelesque about what you encounter. This is much more Zork and Mist than Tsukihime and Clannad. You encounter small text descriptors about the details around you as you choose to move from location to location within the Viper Manor. There are branching paths as you need to learn the interior floor plan when exploring and looking for events. These events are the bulk of the game. Some locations will have traps or puzzles you need to solve. Some are solved by making the correct choices. Others are solved by finding the key items elsewhere in the manor. And there isn't that much exploring to be done. Radical Dreamers is a pretty short game, and the map for the Viper Manor is not particularly labyrinthian. It also helps that after visiting a location, Surge will update it by name when giving you a selection of places to go. Which is good because I do feel a tad bit of repetition when traversing or finishing fights. You will end up reading the same entries for scenes when getting back to wherever you want to be, let alone the same entries after battles depending on how well you perform. Speaking of, because this shares DNA with its JRPG brother, you also encounter battles, sometimes random ones. These are tackled the same way events are. You have to choose the correct option to defeat the enemy. But let's say you choose something incorrectly. After all, it's not like you really know what the right answer is, and not all of these encounters happen the same way each time. Well, there are two somewhat hidden stats in this game. Somewhat hidden because you lack a HUD or menu to see them in. HP and Kid's Affection. HP is pretty self-explanatory. You can die in Radical Dreamers if you keep catching it in the teeth. Kid's Affection, on the other hand, that changes depending on what you do. The best chance you get to check these is that aforementioned post-fight text. You will get a blurb about how Surge is feeling and how Kid seems to be feeling about you. To get the true ending, you want Kid to have a good affection towards Surge. While saying true ending may make you think that there are multiple to discover, you're only kinda correct in that sense. There are multiple endings to Radical Dreamers, but they only become discoverable after you beat the game the first time. The initial mandatory ending just has a bit of a change-up depending on what Kid thinks of you. A band of 3 adventurers make their way to the Viper Manor by moonlight. Actually, wait a second, there's a framing device here. A young child opens a notebook his mother found cleaning out the closet. It turns out it was the diary of his long-lost grandfather. The book asks, "Do you remember how we first met in our adventure sense? Whenever he wants to return to those days long gone, he closes his eyes and whispers your name. Kid." Anyway, a band of 3 adventurers make their way to the Viper Manor by moonlight. They are the bandit extraordinaire, Kid, a young thief with a hot-headed attitude, vaguely Australian accent, and list of adjective identifiers a mile long. The shadow magician, Magil, a strong and silent mage who I will be pronouncing as Magil because if I say anything too close to Maggle, it's going to become John O'Clock up in here. And finally, the player character Surge, a nomadic musician who has been thieving with Kid for a while and may kinda have a thing for her. And you know what? I get it. I too would fall headfirst for a woman with an accent. Their goal is to infiltrate the Viper Manor and steal something called the Frozen Flame from the Manor's head honcho, General Lynx. Even from the start, Kid's hot-headedness gives away that she may want to take a payment of blood from Lynx as well, as Magil attempts to keep her on track for stealing and just stealing alone. Entering the manor from the terrace, we find our dark descent into its stone walls. First traveling downstairs, we find an empty room for Riddell, Lynx's adoptive daughter, as well as the mostly empty room to Lynx himself. But Lynx's room holds a surprise. There is a magical mirror inside that addresses the party, asking it what they wish to know. When you ask to know more about Kid, the mirror tells a tale of a young woman surrounded by poor but happy children. Abruptly, their building bursts into flames and armed troops emerge on the scene. They kidnap the young woman and the children perish in the calamity. Save one. The mirror shows a small girl screaming and crying as the only survivor. Kid kind of fucking storms out, having her past now open to search. Back upstairs, the crew enter the study. Its large bookcases yield no helpful information, but a patrolling guard enters the study and forces them to hide, during which they overhear the guard say something about Poor being on the move. Don't get too comfortable hearing familiar Chrono Trigger locations, this is really the only one. On the other side of the terrace, we find a broken down clock tower room. Among the misplaced mechanicals, Kid excitedly scores some sort of antique blade she thinks she could sell, but Magil tells her to drop it and keep focused on the mission. Suddenly, a voice cuts in, as an old hooded woman appears. This old crone immediately clocks Kid as being someone who's infiltrating the manor to settle a score with Lynx. In fact, she may already know who Kid is. The woman tells a tale from about 5 years ago, how a 10-year-old girl who fancied herself a thief arrived at the manor. Kid freezes up as the woman continues, saying the girl was an orphan who wished to take on Lynx by herself to avenge the girl who cared for her like a big sister. This didn't go well for the young thief, as she was captured and only escaped due to a friend sneaking in and rescuing her. Allegedly, the woman says, this friend was someone who could slip in and out of shadows. Speaking directly to Kid, the hooded woman says that if she wants to steal the jewel and beat Lynx, Kid must be willing to give up her most valuable possession. For if she holds on to it, the hands of her clock will never budge, staying trapped in the past. She also offers to heal Surge before we leave, which was very kind of her. The next room over seems to be a treasure vault. Kid can apparently smell the gold, but it's currently locked. The last destination over here is a cold and windowless room. Surge and Magil find inscriptions on the wall written in blood. They are very spotty, but they say something about dragoons and an enchanted sword. Suddenly, the door slams shut and the trio are assaulted by an SNES sprite scaler. Luckily, they are able to ram the door and bust out before being slaughtered by the plated ceiling. Afterwards, Magil explains that the dragoons being referenced must be the Acacia Dragoons, an elite force under the employ of a Western ruler called General Viper. 10 years ago, Lynx wiped out the dragoons, and this torture chamber must have been their final resting place. With the treasure vault still locked, the party returns to Lynx's room to consult the mirror. It tells them that the key is in a purple book in the back of the study. In the study, we correctly identify the book and find the key. Back at the treasure vault, the door is now open, and Kid has to keep her head in the game when faced with the mountains of gold and glitter inside. At the back of the vault lies a radiant jewel, the reason we are here in the first place, the frozen flame itself. But as Magil removes it from the pedestal, the doors lock shut, and an alarm goes off as the frozen flame reveals itself to be a decoy. Quickly, the party hide, as a group of goblin guards enter the vault. They muse aloud about if it was a small vermin that could have set off the alarm, accompanied by Kid doing her best attempts at animal noises to convince them that's the case. Well, at least until the goblins ponder on if a Hecarim set it off, and Kid kinda just has to guess what the hell a Hecarim sounds like. Yeah, the plan didn't really go all that hot, and you have to fight your way out of this one. Searching the goblin guards after the fight, Kid finds a small hand-shaped medallion. Magil explains it's a key to a magical seal. Going back downstairs, the party find an atrium with a pool. As Kid and Surge inspect the water, they find fishes within, and as they inspect the fishes, they realize they are hungry piranha. Suddenly, the pool begins to fill with red liquid, overflowing the atrium and allowing the piranha to attack the party if they don't run away. After escaping the piranha pool, Surge finds a large stone face. Magil explains that this is a mouth of truth. There are a variety of goods Kid can put in the mouth, but the correct answer is the hand-shaped medallion. In the distance, they hear a latch opening and the sound of draining water. The medallion was the ticket to emptying the atrium and allowing the party to cross to the other side. First, the gang find the doors to the catacombs, but it is locked. Next, they find the armory, where a goblin sits reading a book and sipping tea. Kid immediately tries to hard-ass him into telling us where the catacombs key is, and the goblin is, frankly, completely unshaken. This is Esmeld. He's not a hostile goblin. In fact, he's kinda just big homie chillin'. You drink tea with him as he says that he will give you the catacombs key for a good story. Surge creates a story about a girl who finds a beetle in the forest, taking it home to paint it gold and then selling it for a large sum under the guise of it being a lucky bug. My quizzical inflection is because Surge claims he is making this up, whereas Kid starts to throttle him and asks how he knows about the golden beetle, which implies that this is a true story and that Kid is the aforementioned little girl. Regardless, Esmeld is entertained sufficiently and gives you the key. Before returning to the catacombs, the crew find the kitchen. While Surge and Kid help themselves to the stew that's cooked up, a small rat in a cage calls out to them. It claims it was trying to get food for its mother and pleads for you to release it so it can return. Surge, empathetic as always, releases the rat, but is immediately attacked as the rat grows into a large griffin. After successfully fighting it, the griffin begs off again, giving critical information as a reward. He says that one day, you may find yourself caged from all sides as well. The path out is 3 steps right, 2 steps left, and 2 steps right. Back at the catacombs, we enter the locked dungeon to find all empty holding cells but one. A ragged man moans and sobs, mumbling to himself in repentance, repeating names such as the Dragoons, Miss Riddell, and General Viper. Magil explains that the man must have retreated into his own mind and put up a wall to block away the surroundings he is in. The only way we could break through to him and learn what he knows is with something that could surpass his mental wall. As he has mentioned Riddell, the trio return to her room for clues. This time, Riddell is actually there. We grill her for information on the Frozen Flame and the Acacia Dragoons, and she obliges. Riddell says that the Frozen Flame is an elusive jewel with a mysterious power, the type of power that can change history. Over time, the flame fell into her father, General Viper's, hands. That's when Lynx arrived, playing the act of a friend until he could double-cross Viper and take the flame and a young Riddell as his own. Regarding the man of the catacombs, Riddell says he is the traitor that caused the downfall of the Dragoons. The beatings he sustained in the torture chamber caused him to lose his mind. Riddell says that if you plan on investigating the torture chamber for clues, then you should make sure to have the Einlanzer with you, a holy sword created by ancients and apparently the counterpart to the demonic sword, the Masamune. That sword Kid originally found in the clock tower might be the Einlanzer, so the party book it back to that part of the manor. Upon re-finding the sword, Magil says it could be the Einlanzer, or it could be the Masamune. This prompts Surge to ask Magil about the Masamune and, more specifically, if he knew its owner. With seeming hesitation, he says he did. Kid asks if he was a friend of Magil's. No answer. Kid then asks if it was one of his enemies then. Magil eventually says no. Anyways, they grab the sword and book it back to the torture chamber. Once inside, Magil finds a clue. A thick butter-like substance between the cracks in the brick floor. The SNES sprite scaler ceiling attacks again, and this time Surge plunges the sword into the floor, releasing bolts of energy that stop the trap. Now safe from the ceiling, they re-examine the inscription from earlier, finding an out-of-place stone in the wall. By removing it, they find a ring with the Acacia Dragoon's emblem on it. Back to the man in the catacombs, we jog his memory with the ring. The old man mistakes the party for old allies of his and Riddell, eventually telling Kid about the secret entranceway to the Frozen Flame that is hidden in the ballroom. Once inside, they pull the candlestick that activates the secret elevator, slowly descending the party to their final destination. During their descent, Kid starts to break character a bit. She opens up to Surge about her struggles, how she feels about fate, ever so briefly taking off the mask of her gruff exterior before the elevator comes to its stop. As the party cautiously approaches the Frozen Flame's hiding place, Surge asks Magil about what the jewel really is. Magil claims it's more than just an object. It was a part of a huge meteorite from long, long ago. People have been trying to harness its power over time, with its status as a treasure masking whether the power it contains is a blessing or a curse. Magil explains that there is at least one entire race that has fallen from the Frozen Flame, a people who once built a thriving metropolis but have now had all knowledge of them wiped away by the sands of time. Magil does not answer Surge's follow-up question. But then, how did you know about all this? The party's progress becomes halted, as bolts of light encircle them. The trio has become trapped in the walled light of a devil's circle. Thankfully, using the instructions given by the spared Griffin, they are able to make their way out with no injuries. It was the last of the manor's traps, as once they are past it, they find the holding room of the Frozen Flame. As the party gaze upon the Scarlet Jewel, Magil whispers to himself that the area they find themselves in are the intact ruins of the lost magical kingdom. But before Serge can ask what Magil means, Lynx makes himself known. Kid immediately engages him to no avail, as Lynx deflects her knife and tells Magil to not try anything like last time. Lynx explains that this was all bait to lure Kid back, as there is a rock she has that Lynx wants. A rock she received from her sister many years ago. Her precious keepsake, the Chrono Trigger. As Lynx draws his saber, Kid shouts that she will never forgive him for killing Luca. Her and Lynx battle as she roundly gets her ass kicked. Magil's attempt to intervene has him tangled in magical threads, uselessly binding him away from the fight. Serge attempts to insert himself in the fight and fares no better, being lifted by the neck and strangled by Lynx as he taunts Kid. If Kid wants Serge to live, she needs to hand over the Chrono Trigger. As Lynx explains, it's actually a tiny condensed universe that gains the power to bend space-time when combined with the frozen flame. As Serge nearly passes out, Kid offers up the Chrono Trigger. As Lynx approaches to take it from her, she pulls out a knife instead and stabs him in the face. They continue their fight until suddenly, the frozen flame and the Chrono Trigger begin to react. As the room is enveloped with light, the scene changes. Serge can hear only a single voice. Long ago, in a faraway kingdom, lived a girl whose power was so great it caused the kingdom to end. It crumbled under its own weight, engulfing many in a temporal vortex. But not the girl. She survived to an even worse fate. Running from her past and fearing her future, wanting nothing more than to be swept up in the time vortex herself. Hating what she'd done, refusing what she'd said or heard, to simply continue living was her curse. But the stone, it had other plans for her. It turned back time and scattered her memories, giving her another chance. Since the stone was in her possession, she carried its will and power, and so she was born into this era, returning as a mere infant. The Chrono Trigger shatters. The cavern holding everyone begins to distort and bends reality. Serge hears a lone girl's voice. "Please, this dark energy, make it stop!" Serge finds himself somewhere beyond time and space. An ocean where he can see the flow of everything all at once. He can see himself as a baby. He can see himself as an old man. He can see infinite versions of himself everywhere he looks. Resting in eternity, a voice reaches out to him, and he hears a single song. He yells for Kid to somehow be able to hear him. Kid responds, unsure of where they are. She says that song, that beautiful song playing, was Luca's favorite. Serge smiles as he recalls composing that song when he was still primarily a musician instead of a thief. Kid confides in Serge, asking to make sure he won't leave her. It all makes sense to her finally. She knows who she is now. She knows what she's here for. They return to the cavern as Lynx continues his attack on Kid. But before he can make any more moves, the old hooded woman from before busts into the room, flanked by soldiers. Lynx calls her Vera and claims this troop is from Poor, as they want the frozen flame themselves. Everyone bails out to avoid capture, as Magil retreats to the shadows with Serge and Kid in tow. Outside the manor, the trio are attempting to escape. Kid turns to Serge and tells him to escape alone, as Poor is really only after Magil and herself. Serge fights back against this, but Kid assures him that she knows who she used to be long ago. She'll see him again. Someday she knows she'll see him again. Luca's Chrono Trigger was lost. She couldn't get her hands on the frozen flame, but it's okay. She now has a new treasure, one that is the most valuable and unstealable treasure in the world. She knows who she is again. She turns away from Serge. He attempts to follow her in protest, but the shadow of Magil blocks his path, concealing their exit together. Back at the storybook, the tale ends. The child closes his grandfather's book as he hears his mother calling to him. His friend is here. A strangely nostalgic and brash young girl barges in. She calls the boy Surge and says there's an old mansion nearby they need to explore the ruins of. The credits roll as we see Surge, Kid, and Magil above the forest, watching the birds fly by in the wind. Radical Dreamers is one of the most bizarre games I think I've played, and for a lot of different reasons. First off, it's extremely weird to see this kind of game jam sized release by Square, and in the series of one of their biggest releases. Just to clarify, I'm primarily coming to Radical Dreamers under the guise of a world where Chrono Cross does not exist yet. To take Chrono Trigger and expand on it in this way is so against the grain. It's impressive. Honestly, it's pretty brave. This is so left field for what Chrono Trigger was. Gameplay, size, tone, everything really. It's making this single game into a series in the most topsy-turvy way possible. And man, speaking of topsy-turvy, what was Kato cooking here? Maybe I'm a simpleton, but I was fine with the ending of Chrono Trigger. I don't really sense loose ends to the plot other than what happened to Shala, and leaving that open-ended for Magus to continue hunting felt perfectly acceptable. Sure, it's an unanswered question, but not one that lingers in a way that hinders the game. So I understand where Kato is coming from to explain what happened to Shala in this work, but the way he gets there feels like it introduces more questions. To summarize, because let's be honest, I had to review the footage myself when writing the story section to fully digest what is happening, Radical Dreamers seems to take place roughly 15 to 20 years after Chrono Trigger. Luca seemingly runs an orphanage. I say seemingly because Kid refers to Luca as a big sister, but Luca is far too old to ever be considered an orphan, even if something happened to her parents. Honestly, this is an instance where it's a little hard to see past Chrono Trigger saying in no uncertain terms that Luca does run an orphanage and not backport it to Radical Dreamers. Regardless, Luca and her orphanage-shaped function that she may or may not run is attacked, and Kid is the only survivor. We can assume that Lynx attacked the orphanage because Luca was originally in possession of the Chrono Trigger. This may or may not imply that we are in a timeline where Chrono was never saved, but she gave it to Kid before the attack happens. Young Kid assaults the Viper Manor for revenge, but is captured and saved by Magil, who we have gotten numerous glaring hints to being Magus. The reason Magus saves Kid and then travels with her is because Kid is some form of reincarnation of Shala. Magus has to somehow know this, but can't bring Kid to that answer himself. The little Frozen Flame story at the end makes it sound like after the Ocean Palace incident, which I believe is the last time we saw Shala, the Chrono Trigger, which is in her possession for some reason, rewinds time on Shala to recreate her as an infant. It also implies that she has the Chrono Trigger with her when this happens, being something that Luca must have picked up when she discovered her and then gave back when Kid got older. Or the Frozen Flame sent her back and Luca already had the Chrono Trigger from her adventures in the first game. It's up in the air because the wording is a little wishy-washy. I guess it's also kinda unsure if Kid knows that the Frozen Flame is a hunk of Lavos and the Chrono Trigger would be a reactionary ingredient to it, or if it's just happenstance because the Frozen Flame is kinda the excuse, in her eyes, to hunt down Lynx. Regardless, this is how Radical Dreamers answers the question of what happened to Shala, and I guess it's fine, but it introduces so many more additional questions. Outside of Shala, Magus, Luca, and the City of Poor, Radical Dreamers does not really feel like it takes place in the same world as Chrono Trigger. Again, I think the issue is that this takes place roughly 20 years after Trigger, so when it's introducing multiple locations and people of interest, it kind of feels like they are coming up out of thin air. You travel time and the world over in that game. I feel like if Viper, Lynx, and the Dragoons were real movers and shakers, you would have heard of them. The Frozen Flame feels a little bit made up too. It's not like we weren't there watching the entire saga of Zeal falling. But maybe the Frozen Flame is a part of the Mammon Machine. Also, who is Surge? Surge having a grandson also named Surge feels a little too conspicuous in a story that is dealing with the reincarnated self, IMHO. I don't think he actually is or represents someone, But in a game where the main cast is not who they seem to be, it comes off feeling a little wanting that Surge is just a guy who was there being a dude. Regardless, the point is, whatever Radical Dreamers is answering, it feels like it is leaving more questions in its wake. It's a very interesting game, and an even more interesting story, but if Kato's intent was to shore up loose ends from Chrono Trigger, then I don't think creating more new ones was to his benefit. I can see why he would come away from this dissatisfied. There really does feel like a larger sense of something in here that he wasn't able to get to within the 3 months it took to make this game. But when I ventured to find the additional endings, kinda in an attempt to see if they would shell out more details, I only became more confused. The additional endings to Radical Dreamers are fucking weird, man. Both for reasons in-game and reasons out of game. What the fuck is going on here? Okay, so for example, one of the additional endings is a farcical diversion where Majel reveals to Riddell that he is Gilbert, a young sweetheart from Riddell's youth who promised to marry her later in life. They do a not exactly funny comedy routine before escaping the manor with Riddell in tow, and the bad guys throw fireworks or whatever as they escape in matrimonial celebration. I don't even care to look at my footage to write about this because it was just not worth my time. Another ending has Kid accidentally summon Lilith, the goddess of death, when she writes Lynx's name in what is basically the Death Note, and now the party has to deal with the goddess of death being around. Majel fights her, Surge has to take care of Kid. I don't really remember the rest of it because my wife called me during my playtime, and again, I really don't care. Both of these are just additional fun bonuses using the assets from the main story. They resonate with me absolutely zero at all, but that's totally fine. Then came along Kid in the Sunflower, an absolutely baffling ending where Kid is harassed by a French pervert Pepe Le Pew-ass sunflower, and in the act of cutting it down, is absorbed into a hulking biomonster that can now use magic. Majel has to prepare a way to save Kid while Surge runs into the manor's goblin guards and their French leader, who are preparing to take down the monster. Eventually, Majel reveals that Surge can save Kid with love, and a successful kiss returns Kid to her normal form. So for starters, what the fuck? But what really confuses me about this ending is the amount of unique art assets that relate to just this scenario. There are more endings like this that are equally as nonsensical and art unique. It really confuses me because if Radical Dreamers was a quick and messy development, why was such effort put into the bonus endings if Kato's main story was not satisfactory by his measure? If this game was going past its estimated development time, and in some ways it was, how is it that some of these weren't cut and left by the wayside? This is probably the part of the game that confuses me the most. The effort put into the things that matter the least, when presumably the things that matter the most could have had more time in the oven. I understand game dev is messy, and this was an extremely quick turnaround, but the juxtaposition between the main story feeling like it needed a little extra love and seeing surreal endings with gigantic mecha battles makes it kinda hard to hold it all in your head. But overall, I really liked Radical Dreamers. However, I think I like Radical Dreamers for reasons that almost can't exist anymore. I think the feeling of exploring this dark and mysterious manor was top-notch. The times Radical Dreamers hit me the hardest were the moody atmosphere and sinister fear of what could lie around any corner. I liked it the most when I forgot about it being a game in the Chrono series. In fact, was this ever even promoted as being a Chrono follow-up? Was the original Satellaview release put out into the world as a fresh-faced square joint, leaving unsuspecting players to find out during the climax that this indeed ties back into Chrono Trigger? I like that version of Radical Dreamers more. Radical Dreamers as Radical Dreamers, not Radical Dreamers as this mysterious Chrono offshoot with a reputation or lineage to flow into. Because honestly, I think the game is at its weakest when it's trying to be a Chrono game. When it's just a tense and spooky heist adventure, that's when Radical Dreamers sings the loudest. As a game, I liked it more than I was expecting. As an expansion on what happens after Chrono Trigger, I think I liked it a lot less than I planned. Obviously, try as I might to stay within the timeline, it's impossible to cast out what Radical Dreamers was a stepping stone towards. This release was eventually deemed non-canon-ish, as Square would begin working on the actual follow-up to Chrono Trigger as the 1999 PlayStation 1 release, Chrono Cross. Chrono Cross takes the seed of what Radical Dreamers was trying to do and expands it out with the scale of the story likely needed. I say likely because I've only ever dabbled with the game myself and never played through it fully. But I know that the premise of Chrono Cross retreads a lot of concepts that make up Radical Dreamers. The main character is Surge. He meets an accent-laden tomboy thief named Kid. She wishes to steal the Frozen Flame from General Lynx, and it's held at Viper Manor. Also, General Viper and the Acacia Dragoons are there as well. This leaves Radical Dreamers in a very weird place, unable to really escape being more than just a curio. And that's cause that's kind of really all it is. I think Radical Dreamers suffers the weight of being chained to the Chrono series, a series with a fan base rabid for more than what they ever got. I remember hearing about Radical Dreamers in the early aughts. I remember hearing about the fan translation finally being done. I remember the reverence behind this faux Chrono game. The real Chrono fans were ecstatic about this, not so much the passersby. It's a very interesting game that is worth your time to play through, but I don't think it's the more Chrono series that it had to live up to being in the North American purview. But I'm glad it was never forgotten. Seeing the remaster of Chrono Cross be paired with the first ever official worldwide release of Radical Dreamers is a net positive for the world. Sure, there was the fan translation, but you do have to be somewhat of a sicko to find fan translations for games on a system peripheral many might not even know existed. Not only that, but Radical Dreamers was translated into more than just English for its worldwide debut. More people should experience this, and the official release will help them get to it. Because as much as Radical Dreamers feels like a sketch of an idea instead of a full one, it is a sketch of a very good idea. I may be projecting a little here, but I think being able to see what Kato was working on will help inform more of his future works. Playing Radical Dreamers gives you an isolated example of his style. He didn't really do the bonus endings, he was the main story writer here. And this relates to more than just Chrono Cross. As next episode, we finally take the plunge. We are going to look at one of the most important and cultural defining games in all of video game history. I ask for your patience, as it's going to be a while to produce this thing. It's going to be big. It's going to be really big. Next episode, we take a look at a game Masato Kato also had a hand in working on. It's time. We are going to cover Final Fantasy VII.